Welcome to the Streets and People podcast, where we explore having more transport options that are less hassle to use. Hosted by Get Around Caboolture, we bring you 3 types of episodes. People and Projects share stories of change. Not Everyone Drives gives voice to non-drivers. Roadwheels 360 unpacks road rules for people outside a car. Music by Grand Project, and let's make our Grand Project reimagining streets made for people. Today we're doing one of our People and Projects episodes. I'm here in the studio with James Reynolds. I know James because we met at Transport Camp and you had this Pragmatic strategies for legitimacy. I thought that would be really cool to have you on the show. We tried it once already but needed to shift the direction so that it was very applied, because I think when you've done your PhD it's very theoretical. PhD is a doctorate, which is a rather large research report, which is intense and difficult and painful for those who may not be aware of what a PhD or a doctorate is. They're the same thing. We're going to go through the 9 pragmatic strategies for legitimacy and apply that to getting kids riding bikes to school. And the angle we're going to take is if our listener is with council or state or federal government or a community member, how can they apply the strategies? Which one works best where? What do you reckon, James?
Sounds like a plan. Joys of trying to get academic knowledge into things that are a bit more useful in the community and that are a bit more useful to people who are actually out there trying to apply things is a perennial problem, but all part of the fun.
Great. I'm here on Gubbi Gubbi country in Queensland, in Caboolture. And James, whereabouts are you calling from?
I'm in Richmond in Victoria, which is Kulin lands. Much of this research was actually done up a little further north in Wemba country near Swan Hill. The very fact that we're saying where we are is something that has changed recently as far as the legitimate way you start a podcast. It's now accepted that this is the way we talk about how to start things, where we are, and we actually know the names of these places.
And that's happened through advocacy. How did you become interested in this whole area?
I have a background in road safety and traffic engineering, an area in which often we know the right technical answer, we know what to do, but the hardest thing is trying to actually get it done, because politics, institutions, it's contested often, and that's not something that we get taught in engineering school or in planning school. And my PhD was actually funded by the Victorian state government because they were trying to understand better how to get bus lanes and things like that to actually stick, so that you put in the bus lane and then there's an election and the bus lane doesn't get taken out. It is an area that has much wider implications, and we were leaning on a whole lot of knowledge that's already out there in political science, public policy, about how you make things legitimate.
With that in mind, let's crack on. So you've got 9 pragmatic strategies. Let's just go with number 1. Which of our listener, if they're in council, state or federal government or a community member, who would apply it and how? I realised during editing that I needed to explain what each pragmatic strategy is and a bit of a brief definition so it can be applied more widely. The first 3 strategies come under the category of build legitimacy before implementation. The first one is called tailored reporting. Share clear, relevant data that helps people outside your field understand the case for change, especially decision makers and the public.
If we think about the first strategy, which is all about building legitimacy before implementation, and you're looking to use some form of technical analysis. If we're thinking about riding to school, if I was to go to Paris and sit outside a school and count how many kids came to school on a bike, the number would be very high, because that's the accepted way that you get to school in Paris. You take a bike, you take transit, you walk. If I was to instead do that outside of school in Caboolture, I think the number would be fairly small. It would be the done thing. It's the status quo. And so the question then is, as a community member who is keen to have more people riding because of all the various health benefits of all that, how would you think about using technical analysis to legitimate riding to school? Say there's 2 schools in the area. Every Tuesday we count how many kids ride to school at each school gate, and it becomes a competition, something that gets reported in the school newsletter. Oh, last time we had 20% ride to school, this time we had 22. Things are going up, things are good. The same thing from a government perspective. How would you use technical analysis to legitimate getting kids to ride to school, encouraging that? Maybe you do look at one of the key issues, which is safety. Is the environment around the school safe? Can you show that to the people who who are deciding whether or not their children are riding to school that, yes, it is safe. Yes, we do have X number of kilometres of bikeways. This is how you get there. Here's some technical support for why we should be doing this. Here's also potentially some money that might help with the things that people care about. Will my bike get stolen? Do we need more bike parking? These are technical analysis approaches, but you are focusing it very much on trying to encourage people to do the thing that you'd like, which is to be a bit closer to Paris levels of school bike riding.
That's great. Now, number 2, what's that one? Number 2 is strategic planning. Embed the proposed change within a broader plan or vision to show how it contributes to long-term goals rather than appearing as a one-off action.
Again, trying to build legitimacy before you implement something. This comes out of some of the exciting stuff in Zurich and Curitiba, where they had vision-led transport plans. In Zurich, the plan was the buses and the streetcars should go as fast as is technically possible. In Caboolture, maybe the plan is as many kids as can possibly ride to school. We want to maximize the amount of bike riding to school. Then whenever anything comes up, we're putting in a new traffic light at this intersection. Are we in for this or are we against this? Oh, is it going to be good for the kids riding to school? Yes, no. Sometimes it will be, sometimes it won't. But because you have a vision, you are always trying to move incrementally towards that vision. And this comes back into some of the exciting knowledge out of public policy analysis that actually comes from the 50s of all times about how you gradually move policy one step at a time towards what you're trying to achieve.
If that's a policy, that would be council or state government, I think. Is that right?
It could very much be a council or state government thing. Is there a vision for transport to schools in the state government? Does it say we want to maximise school bike use? But again, even within your own school, if the school principal writes in the school newsletter, our vision is to maximise coming to bike by school, suddenly you have a discussion about it. How do we achieve that vision? How do we move towards there? What do we need to change about what we're currently doing? But if there isn't that vision, it's just business as usual.
That's great. So number 3. Number 3 is participatory processes. Involve the community or stakeholders early through votes, meetings, consultations, or other public processes to build trust and shared ownership.
The third pragmatic strategy is very much about public engagement. We have examples of bus lanes being legitimised because of a public vote. They actually had an election issue about this. In the context of a school, maybe we need to actually find out a bit more about why the school kids aren't riding their bike to school right now. Do we need to actually have a survey that says, how often does your child ride to school? What are the things that are stopping them riding more? Are you actually interested in this? What do we need to do to make this? Ask the people, because fundamentally, it's your child, it's your school. There's many, many reasons why you might really want to have your child ride to school, but there's something in the way. There's a condition, there's a problem. You're really concerned about the safety on that corner. Well, if we get some engagement, we might actually find out a bit more of that sort of stuff, and we can start overcoming some of those problems, because if that's the one key thing that's stopping your child riding to school, once we take away that impediment, now your kid can ride to school. But we don't know that unless we actually ask the people, because they're the ones who know.
A colleague, Prue Oswin, who's up on the Sunshine Coast, this is one of her strategies that she's used, and she put in 3 or 4 pedestrian crossings that were safe and raised, and that completely changed the catchment. I think that sounds like the perfect example of exactly that strategy. Strategy number 4. So now we're up to the next section, which is avoid triggering opposition. Number 4 is separation from contested areas. Design the change so it avoids directly affecting areas, groups, or interests likely to resist. Sometimes that means investing more to work around sensitive spots. We also discuss number 5, which is adding rather than taking. Where possible, add capacity or features rather than reallocating or removing existing resources so current users don't feel they're losing out.
In the context of bus lanes and transit priority, we start talking about things like grade separation, which is strategy number 4, and widening roads, building additional capacity, which is strategy number 5. Not all of these pragmatic strategies are relevant to every single situation. This is very much a framework and some strategy strategies that you, the people who know the place better, can take and choose and pick. I don't think that we're going to build a grade separated bicycle crossing, but hey, if your school is on a really, really busy road, maybe this is the one link that needs to be a bridge. Maybe there needs to be a tunnel. Having gone to Perth, a lot of their crossings around the university are actually underground because there's really fast traffic. And yeah, sure, it's really expensive. But if this is the one thing that gets that entire school to ride their bike to school, maybe that's something that we, the community, can decide to spend money on.
Describe to me what grade separated means.
You are getting something to go over or under subways. It's grade separated transit, pedestrian bridges that go over freeways, tunnels that go under railway lines, things like that. Unfortunately, these things are slightly expensive. Maybe the street outside the school is super busy. It's a highway. The engineer within city council or whatever can't get the state government road authority to say, yes, we can have a traffic light, or yes, we can have a bicycle zebra crossing here. Yeah, maybe the only thing you can have is a bridge and you can find some way of getting that money. Yes, it's expensive, but sometimes that's the only way to make progress.
What was the difference between 4 and 5? Because you mentioned 5. How does strategy 4 differentiate from strategy 5?
Very similar. In both times, you're trying to avoid impacts on anyone else. But strategy 5 is very much about building extra capacity. In the context of riding to school, maybe it is literally a case of widening some footpaths. You are building extra capacity such that the bikes can now be off the road. Maybe you are building a bike lane. Maybe you are widening the road. Something that means that you aren't taking away a lane from traffic. You're not going to run into problems of, oh my gosh, you've taken away a lane from traffic and now I can't park my car or something. But you have achieved your goal, which is to make cycling safer so that children can get to school on their bikes. And that might have been the one thing that was preventing them. Potentially expensive, but this might be the thing that you can actually build legitimacy for. And it might be the thing to go to your local councillor who's up for election again and say, right, well, we need this 15 metres of footpath widened because that's the thing that is keeping 50 kids from riding to school.
Going back to grade separation, would that be more of a state or a federal funded one rather than councils wouldn't be able to afford that?
Certainly councils build bridges and culverts over creeks and small things, but it very much talks about what we're trying to get over or under. If your school is on a very busy road, chances are that road is controlled by the state government. They're obviously going to be involved in the planning for anything that goes across. It might well be that no, they don't want to have a traffic light because it's going to screw up the freight trucks that are going by or something like that. Maybe you can find some money, talk to the federal minister, state member. A single grade crossing over this highway might solve a whole lot of problems. But if you were to go and look at it from a fully rational point of view, is this a good use of our money? It's a harder case to make, but it might be the one thing that's sitting in your way. There's a lot of places where grade separation's been done. Toronto's quite famous for having all of their mall downtown is actually in the basement level. And so whenever you want to connect one building to another, you just cut through the road at the -1 level, and suddenly there's 25 kilometers of grade separated. It's like being in one of the really large shopping centers, and it has absolutely no impact on anyone who's trying to use the street because it all happens below grade. That's going to be a harder sell for a school. But big enough school, big enough road, you might be able to make the case. And it's one of the strategies you can select out of the 9.
Caboolture has a river. If you wanted a little bridge, would that be that strategy to use?
Certainly could be. Maybe that one bridge over the river is the missing link. That means that instead of having to be on 5 kilometres of busy streets and having to take a lane away from that to put in a bike lane, or the children from that school not being interested at all at cycling, maybe this one bridge is the thing. Maybe it's a pontoon. Here in Melbourne, we have a bicycle ferry boat that runs on Sundays beneath the Westgate Bridge. There's this ginormous freeway way up above you. Maybe this is the solution for a particular school that happens to be right next to the river, a ferry boat or something. Alternative approaches that don't sort of often get the perspective.
This is great. What was number 6? Number 6 is low impact improvements. Make behind the scenes or subtle changes that improve outcomes without visibly disrupting others' routines or interests.
Number 6, you're really looking at subservience. Say the problem is that you are trying to get the kids along the street to the school and the street's really busy. There's parking on the street and that's very busy for the businesses. Is there a way that you can get what is needed to legitimize kids riding to school, i.e. some feeling within the school community that will be safe without taking anything from anyone else? Schools tend to open very early in the morning and shops tend to open slightly later. Rather than having a full-time bike lane, maybe you're only taking the on-street parking for 8 till 9. We are seeing this with school speed zones. They're only there when the kids are there, and they're only there on school days. It's slightly inconvenient for all the drivers to go slightly slower, but they only have to go slightly slower when the school kids are there. We don't have a set limit where you're going through on a school holiday and you're trundling along at 40 and you're getting annoyed. And that's the fundamental thing about thinking about it in terms of legitimacy. It's not whether it's right or wrong. We'd love the speed limit to always be 40. It's just more a case of what can you get to stick. Sometimes subservience, doing everything you can to make things better for the kids on their bikes to get to school without asking for anything. Or if you do ask for something, you ask for the absolute smallest that you can get. You only take 5 parking spaces and you only take them before 9 a.m. because you don't need them, or you can find a way of not needing them.
Yeah, I remember you talking about an example in Toronto about a bus lane.
There's been some interesting examples where the bus lane was only there from 5 till 9 because the shops opened at 10 and they could put the bus lane in. And one of the interesting things about this bus lane was that it was a pop-up, which is actually strategy number 8.
Then we're up to number 7. So number 7 begins the category of build support through implementation. Number 7 is start small and build up. Begin with smaller actions that demonstrate success. Use early wins to justify further steps, scaling up gradually.
Number 7, now we're starting to talk about bottom-up and incremental approaches. There's a whole load of really interesting research in public policy about implementation and these street-level bureaucrats who can sometimes take a top-down policy and twist it to their own ways. Some wonderful examples of a street in the UK where they took advantage of the fact that you can have a street party, and they decided to have a street party every day at about 4 p.m. when the kids wanted to have a play because they didn't have a park nearby, and they just kept on bottom up and incrementally applying for a street party permit every day. The same thing is possible if it's within the school. Maybe you are trying to, one at a time, encourage kids at the school ride their bike. There's a real safety in numbers effect in cycling. If you're the first cyclist on the road, it's a little bit sketchy sometimes, but if you're the 100th, well, everybody else who's using the road is used to the idea. And so maybe if you've got a really keen cycling family who lives a fair way from the school, maybe one day, Tuesday's our ride day, and then in a month, my son's friend who's on the way, well, we go and pick them up. Over time, you've got essentially a cycling school bus because you've built it up from the bottom up and incrementally. Everybody's had a chance to get used to the idea. We have examples here in Melbourne. The city's been removing parking spaces one at a time for the last 30 years, I think. No one really notices too much. And if someone does go, oh, no, you can't have that, then there's an opportunity to do small scale things. That sort of is the way that you can be doing it within your own community. Can you get an additional child to ride their bike to school with you, or on their own, one at a time, every Tuesday, now every second, and gradually getting it so that the idea of turning up at school with a bike helmet on is the done thing. Oh, look, everybody's doing that. That is the way that you make these things taken for granted and accepted, is that it just becomes part of the way of doing things.
Okay, so now we are going to cover number 8. Number 8 is temporary setups. Try temporary or low commitment versions of the change to show how it works in real life and reduce resistance to trying it.
So now we're starting to talk about pop-ups. There was a lot of the use of this terminology through COVID times. Everything was a pop-up cafe, pop-up park. Fundamentally, the idea, it comes from tactical urbanism. Sometimes it's guerrilla bike lanes. You go out and you paint the bike lane on the road. Guerrilla knitting, you go and you knit around a tree. There's all this very exciting urbanism because fundamentally it is our street and we can do with it as we see fit because we're the ones who vote for the people who represent us. In the context of a riding to school, how do you do something that pops up that encourages kids to ride to school? Well, maybe the second Tuesday in April is the Ride to Bike Festival. And we all ride our bikes and it's in the newsletter and we do it one day and then it pops down. the next day you go, well, hey, do we want to make this a monthly event? And it'll pop back up if there is legitimacy for it. And this is where the idea of a pop-up is that it's something that's low risk, doesn't take a huge amount of effort, it's temporary. If you want to put a bike lane outside the school gate, you get the cones out and you put a bike lane outside the school gate with the cones. Tomorrow, well, you got to decide whether you're going to do it again or not. And this is the example that I quoted from North America. They went out on the Monday and put the cones out that made them a bus lane. And then they went out and did it on Tuesday. And on Tuesday in the paper, there was a survey from everybody who'd been on the bus on Monday. And they'd asked everybody, hey, do you like getting to the center of town 15 minutes earlier? And everybody on the bus said yes, and that was in the paper. And then on Wednesday, the mayor had a press conference at the pop-up bus lane that was still made out of traffic cones. And he said, well, everybody said in the paper they loved it. I haven't had too many phone calls yet. Maybe we'll do it again tomorrow. And they just kept on doing it for 7 months until they got some money and actually put down some permanent line marking, and they didn't have to get up at 5 a.m. every day with cones. But fundamentally, it is your street. If you want to change it, try not to do anything that's going to get you in trouble with the law. But there is a lovely story out of Seattle of the reasonably polite Seattle bike riders who just made their own bike lane one night. The bike lane got taken out by the city, but it got taken out because the bollards were slightly too big, didn't make standard. There was a nice email from the city engineer to this group of guerrilla activists that said, thanks for your initiative. We've taken the bollards out. You can go and pick them up at the depot, no questions asked, which was nice. And then 6 months later, well, they'd done all the studies and the bike lane was back only now with the proper bollards. But fundamentally, they gave it a bit of a kick to get it started because they had demonstrated the possibility of change and they had shown that, no, the sky doesn't fall. And in the context of riding to school, demonstrate the possibility of change. A one-day festival where we all ride our bikes to school, or anyone who can. And you'll probably find out a lot of stuff. Maybe it turns out that you don't actually have enough adequate bike parking at the school. You might find out all these things. But because it's temporary, because it's an event, because it's a thing, fundamentally, are we all in favour of having a fiesta and riding to school one day? Yeah, it's hard to be against that. Are we all in favour of doing this every day? Maybe pick a day that isn't raining. It's pretty hard to encourage kids to start riding to school every day in the middle of winter when it's going to rain half the time. Pop-ups are a way in which you might be able to legitimise the idea that yes, it is possible to ride your bike to school, and this might be something that we can do more, and it might gradually over time become accepted. But yeah, maybe it is just literally you need some cones out to get the cars slightly further away from the school gate so that kids on bikes can get there. And fundamentally, as a school principal, as someone within the parents group, or as the city engineer, or as the whatever, you actually have a fair bit of power and legitimacy of your own to try stuff. And worst case scenario, you turn up with the cones one day, everybody says they don't like it, and you say, well, this is a pop-up, we're trying to see if it works. I know that it works from a traffic engineering point of view, but I don't know if it works for you, the community, because this is your street and your school. Let's try it and find out together. And a pop-up is a forum in which you can do that, which ties in nicely to pragmatic strategy number 9, which is actually to have a formal trial.
So number 9 is pilot projects. Run formal trial periods with clear timeframes and evaluation. This creates space for experimentation and evidence gathering before full rollout.
We've seen this in Toronto, we've seen this in many places where you say, right, we're going to do this for 3 months, we're going to do this for 12 months, we're actually going to put something down in something that's slightly temporary materials, but we might spike the concrete down a bit. It's still something we can remove, but we'll use that as an opportunity to find out whether this works in the real world. If we get to the end of the trial, we'll write some technical reports and do all our technical analysis to find out whether this works or not. But if it turns out it didn't work for you, the community, it's just a trial. There's nothing to fear because it is actually going. And sometimes in the past examples where such trials have failed, it has been because no one actually believes that it really is a trial. My research is very much saying that you've got to legitimize the fact that, yes, this is a trial, and you can trust that it's not permanent unless we, the people, decide that it is permanent or it actually proves itself. And so it comes back again to some of the stuff around community involvement as well. It's not just informing, not just consulting. No, this is your street. the community needs to decide, because otherwise you'll decide at the next election when you vote the councillor out who approves that trial to be made permanent. Yes, these approaches to try and use things to build legitimacy in the context of a school trying to get kids to ride to school. Before you spend all this money on a brand new bike shelter that has all these bikes in it and all this stuff, well, maybe you get a cargo container and trial it for 3 months to find out whether there actually is the impetus in the community to invest 10 grand in a shed that all the bikes are going to be locked up in. There's no real risk of getting a cargo container. It costs a little bit of money maybe, but you get a cargo container, you put it on the site, all the bikes go in at the start of the day, all the bikes come out at the end of the day, you lock it up. We find out whether we actually want to spend some money on having a bike shed. Maybe you just repurpose an unused classroom as your temporary trial bike shed. Find out whether this ride to school thing has legs. It's something that you could do as a community within the school, or that's something that you could do as a traffic engineer within the local council. Maybe you do trial a bike lane outside the school to find out whether it gets used on the knowledge that it's only there for 3 months. And if it isn't used, well, we'll take it away.
So it sounds like data gathering is a big part of it. I was thinking about if I had kids and I went to the school gate and I just handed out a little flyer, would you like your child to ride to school? How far do they come? Just a little mini survey you could probably do on some free software. Complete our survey. We've actually got one on an episode that we had with Rachel Gallagher. There is a survey which asks about real infrastructure barriers. How safe is it to get to school? And then you could do a survey as long as you've got the data to back it up. You do a before and then you do an after. It sounds to me that that's a really important part of the legitimacy aspect that needs to be in place.
Yeah, that sort of stuff can be very important. In the research I was doing, there was 7 different types of legitimacy. One of them is legitimacy through reasonableness. Is this reasonable? You're not going to know that until you actually get some data and try and figure it out, because through that data, you're trying to show to the voting public, who legitimize things through their vote, that this is a reasonable course of action. Us over in the engineering and planning thing, yeah, bike lanes, reasonable. We should definitely have them everywhere. But the world's more complicated than that. So showing that this is a reasonable trade-off, we're all winning, or those who are only losing by a small amount and the greater good, that can really help if you have some data, and pop-ups and trials are very useful because now you actually have real data from the real world. But again, as you were saying about the survey of people at school, this idea of asking people what the actual impediments are. I mean, I can go out and have a look at the school and tell you what I think from a road safety engineer's point of view. But one of the things I've done in a lot of work around schools is to actually talk to the person holding the stop-go sign, to talk to the teachers as they turn up, because I'm just there for a day. I have all the technical knowledge, but you're the community. You live here. You're here all the time. You will see things that I will not. I can just provide some strategies and some thoughts, but part of that is collecting data so that we actually know that we're talking about the same sort of stuff.
This is really great. And I think using those strategies for a bike lane makes it very real and accessible. We've talked about the strategies and you've touched on legitimacy. Is there anything you would like to add about the different types of legitimacy that you need in order to complete the picture?
The various types that I mentioned, normative is like the law, or what is right from a technical point of view. The technical analysis is trying to show normative legitimacy. Yes, this meets the warrant to have a bike lane. That's one that's quite often there. Another type is sociological legitimacy, this general idea that here, riding to school on your bike is not something that we all agree is the done thing, whereas in Paris, sociologically, people would look at you strangely if you turned up and picked up your kids in a 4-wheel drive in an inner city school in Paris. Riding to school or walking to school is a sociologically legitimate thing. Do you trust the engineer when they say, yes, a bike lane is warranted? Yes, this is the best thing. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Through reasonableness we talked about, is this good, is this bad? What's the overall effect? Is it reasonable for you to have this space for a bike lane, or is it needed for something else? Different people have different ideas as to what reasonable is. When I'm on a bike, I think that it's unreasonable for there not to be a bike lane. But when I'm in a car, I'm like, oh, geez, the traffic's so slow. Oh, this is not a cut and dry thing. Through consent, we were talking about surveys. Do the people of the school consent to park their cars slightly further away so that we can have a bike lane in this space. Is that something that we consent to do? Well, do a survey and find out yes, no. That might help make that happen if you have that sort of data. Then we're also talking about things like conditional normative support, which most people will actually know as NIMBYism. This idea that, well, I'm all in favor of bike lanes, just not outside my house because of X, Y, Z. We'll see this not NIMBYism, but a more positive thing. Well, yeah, I'm all in favor of my children riding their bike to school. I'm sure most people would be, but it's just not safe. It's just not practical. It's just not whatever. And so thinking about these problems through the lens of legitimacy and the idea that sometimes legitimacy is conditional means that rather than, oh, you're a terrible person, you're not having your kids ride to school. It's like, no, you're a very reasonable person. It's just that we haven't fulfilled the conditions yet. Now that we know what the conditions are, maybe that is the one thing that's sitting between you and your child riding their bike to school.
Just to clarify the term NIMBYism, basically the term is NIMBY, not in my backyard. That's what NIMBYism is. I'm happy to have it, but just not in my backyard. That's where that term comes from.
It's sometimes got a negative connotation, but to be honest, there's a reason for people not wanting it in their backyard because it might be loud. The conditions haven't been met. Sometimes we actually see the other one, which is YIMBYism. Yes, in my backyard. People who are passionate about having better this or better that. Yes, I really would like to have the parking removed outside my house and put in a bike lane in front. You know, even if it's not warranted, they really want it because they're very keen on things.
All right. I think there's plenty there for people in the community, people in government departments, no matter where you sit, to be able to find something out of those strategies and understand the different legitimacies. So I think that's been a very fruitful, rounded conversation. I certainly feel well informed about what your PhD was about, and it really helps me understand how to step it through, which is great. So we're at that part where we start to close. Is there anything else you would like to share? Any final comments? Anything you think I should have asked you?
I suppose the thing is that this is all hard. Making progress is difficult. Quite often we get in the mindset of, oh, this is the right thing to do, we should just do it. But things are more complicated in the real world. These pragmatic strategies, this framework, and the words around legitimacy are just ways in which people can think about these that might be new or that might help frame their thoughts. They're not necessarily the right answer. Quite often there isn't the right answer. I don't have all the right answers. It's a matter of picking and choosing these things to suit your particular situation, be it as a community member, be it as a traffic engineer, be it as someone in government. And hopefully these give you some ideas and some ways to think about these challenging things so that we can all make some progress, hopefully. There'll be some show notes that'll include a 2-pager, which will tell you some wonderful examples of this. If you really feel like it, you can read the thesis.
What I'll do is, if our listener wants your details, email me through the website, then I can forward your query on to James. I think that's it. I have really learnt so much about how to categorize and understand the different aspects, and I think there are some people I can share this information with who want people to ride bikes to school and actually have a whole range of things. Stepping it through this way has been really, really fruitful. I've really gotten a lot. I've enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much, James. I've really appreciated it.
Not a problem. Always happy to share knowledge that we've found in research. And yeah, fundamentally, the reason we do all this research is to try and help people like you who are out there on the front lines actually implementing stuff, because that's the point of doing the research in the first place.
Thanks so much, James.
No worries.
Thank you for listening to the Streets and People podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who'd find it helpful. Your small action could make a big difference. We're on all the usual podcasting platforms, so don't miss a single story. To find out what else we do, check out getaroundcaboolture.au. Until next time, remember, there's more than one way to get where you're going. Keep moving, keep listening, and keep imagining streets made for people.